Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Trilbee and welcome to my review of the Martin McDonagh written and directed film Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is one of the 9 Best Picture nominees this year and is actually considered one of the frontrunner in certain categories, for example Best Original Screenplay, Best Picture, Best Actress and Best Supporting Actor for Sam Rockwell. Martin McDonagh is a filmmaker whose work I really like. This is only his 3rd film. I've seen In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths and I really enjoyed both of those films, and unfortunately, I feel like Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which, just for the sake of speed, I will just refer to as Three Billboards for the rest of the review, is actually, I think, one of his weaker films, and while I've not seen all of the Best Picture nominees for this year's Oscars so far, I think this is one of the weaker nominees. That's not to say it's a bad film, I'll get to that later. The plot takes place outside Ebbing, Missouri, and follows Mildred, played by Frances McDormand, who is still grieving over the rape and murder of her teenage daughter a few months earlier, and because the police haven't really had any sort of progress in their investigation, she, out of anger and spite, rents 3 abandoned billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, that says "raped while dying" and "still no arrests. How come, Chief Willoughby?" And Chief Willoughby here is played by Woody Harrelson. And her renting those billboards and putting up those messages sparks a chain of events that bring the community of this town outside Ebbing, Missouri to the brink of collapse in a sense, or at least societal collapse. You've got the townsfolk who are sympathetic to Mildred, but they also really support Willoughby, who is dying of cancer and is also a pillar of the community. He's really well liked amongst the citizens. And you also have another officer, Dixon, played by Sam Rockwell, who is not very well liked by the community for being a very abusive police officer and also a very out and proud racist. In principle, I like what the film is going for, and while I won't go into spoilers here, the theme of the movie is kind of obvious and it wears it on its sleeve, almost to a rather obnoxious extent. About an hour into this 1 hour and 55-minute movie, it clicked with me what this film was trying to say. Yes, anger begets more anger. Mildred's rage at the police department who are trying to help solve this murder case, and her putting up these billboards out of anger and spite and in revenge in a sense, as well as her trying to get over her own personal grief and maybe her own responsibility in what happened to her daughter, brings out the anger of the community, which brings out the anger of the police department, which just begets more anger and more violence. But then nearer the end of the film, there's a scene where Mildred meets her ex-husband in a restaurant who is dating a 19-year-old girl, and they have to say anger begets anger about 6 or 7 times between these 3 characters over the course of the scene, and it made me feel like the film had very little faith in its audience to pick up a rather obvious message, in my opinion. This is not me saying that it's a bad message, and the film does portray it very well, but the fact that it had to spell it out and they say it over and over again, it kind of made me feel like the movie was drilling in this point, which was rather apparent and obvious. But the movie also has a bit of an issue with how it justifies the whole anger begets more anger moral, because you have Mildred here played superbly by Frances McDormand, who is great in the movie. She has a quite justified anger about what happened to her daughter and the negligence of the police department and how there has been no arrests and how nothing has happened. That's a very understandable anger, even if that anger takes her to places that really she cannot justify. But on the other hand, you have this anger from Dixon, played by Sam Rockwell, who is a real piece of work. He's an abusive cop, he abuses his power, he is a, to quote the film, N-word torturer. But the movie still tries to give him some sort of redemption arc, and it feels really tone deaf in the fact that this is not just an out and proud racist, this is an out and proud racist cop who has actively abused his position. He has a position of authority that he routinely and flagrantly, with gleeful abandon, abuses. And don't get me wrong, this film isn't quite as terrible at depicting race relations as 2004's Crash, but it's still not a great substitute, and the film does not seem to be able to grapple with the subject matter in an effective way. Sam Rockwell is great in the film, as is Frances McDormand, as is Woody Harrelson. The whole cast are great. You've got a small role from Peter Dinklage, who is really good as well. But it feels like everyone in this film, despite them almost all being nominated for Oscar trophies, it feels like they've been better elsewhere. And the fact that Mildred even registers as a character in the movie in the first place is entirely down to Frances McDormand's performance, because on the page it feels like Mildred is more of a cipher for Martin McDonagh to vent at injustices he sees in the world. Mildred gets many opportunities to rant at priest molestation of children and schoolyard bullying and all these other issues, but it feels like the victims themselves aren't allowed a voice and aren't allowed to speak up. It's all done through Mildred. which further feeds into the idea that the film doesn't quite know how to depict the racism on display with Dixon. But still, getting back on track, the performances are really good, with the only person in this film coming out looking pretty badly being Abby Cornish, who plays Chief Willoughby's wife. She's the only person in the cast with this really upper-class British accent, which is never explained in the film, and also the fact that she's about 20 to 25 years younger than Woody Harrelson, and no one brings it up. She genuinely looks young enough to be his daughter, and yet these two are in a relationship. But I don't want you folks to think that I hate this movie, because I actually do like it, and in some ways I do recommend it, so let's talk about some positives. I think Ben Davis, who did the cinematography for the previous Martin McDonagh film In Bruges, returns here. He's also done the cinematography for Doctor Strange, Age of Ultron, Before I Go to Sleep, Guardians of the Galaxy. He's a great cinematographer. He's done really great work in both small and large-scale films, and here he does a lot with very little. The lighting's terrific, I love the shot composition, there's a brilliant one-take action scene that I won't spoil, that's just really well handled. The makeup's really good, I liked the music by Carter Burwell in a rather understated but very appropriate score. The plot takes some unexpected twists that I genuinely didn't see coming, particularly with Woody Harrelson's character. There's some bleak moments of humour which felt really appropriate and really well handled, and even though it's not something I can really rate the movie for, the activism inspired by the film has been really interesting to see unfold, whether or not it's people protesting about the Syrian civil war, the Conservatives' treatment of the NHS in the UK, and people setting up their own billboards asking questions of our politicians and people in authority. It's interesting to see Mildred's billboard protest actually bleed out into the real world, even though if you actually watch the film itself, it kind of goes against that approach. But of course I'm not going to hold that against the film, I just think it's an interesting observation. One thing that I do take umbrage with the film, however, apart from the fact that it's about 15 minutes too long and the third act really drags its feet, is the ambiguous ending that kind of goes against the whole anger begets anger moral of the story. It feels like the movie is missing an ending, and I know it's going for ambiguity, but when the ambiguity actually goes against the very moral of the movie, it makes for a rather hollow ending, which really dragged me out of the rest of the film, and as a result, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri hasn't really stuck with me after watching it. I appreciate the performances and how well it's been put together, but when an ending contradicts everything the movie is going for to such a blatant degree, in my mind it kind of says, oh, that movie kind of shot itself in the foot, and I can't really take the themes and the moral of the movie out of the theatre with me to think about and dwell on, because the movie doesn't want me to, clearly. As a result, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri is a frustrating watch for me. I think it's one of the weaker Best Picture nominees, if not the weakest that I've seen so far. And even though the performances are really strong, I feel like every cast member has been better elsewhere. Its intentions are noble and its production is striking, but it feels so haphazardly put together. I give Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri 3 stars out of 5. Hey folks, thanks so much for watching this video, and oh my goodness, who are these names? Who are these awesome, really cool people? Well, they are my patrons. They help to keep the lights on here at Trilbee Reviews. They get early access to some of my content, and also including my podcast, the Film Brits podcast. They also get to be a part of the podcast by asking questions and submitting topics and such, so if you would like to help support the content and also get involved in the podcast and other videos, and also get your names in the credits like these handsome devils, then please consider becoming a patron. Links in the description below.